Look at that thing scurry. Whole town's got to watch your little hero hobble after his supper. Some champion you turned out to be. Useless damaged goods. Just saying what everyone's thinking.
A corrupt sheriff kicked a disabled military dog's water bowl across the diner floor, laughing as the animal limped toward it. He called the war hero useless damaged goods in front of the entire town. The dog's handler, a quiet man in a worn jacket, said nothing. The sheriff thought he'd won. He thought he was untouchable in his small mountain kingdom. But he made one fatal mistake. He had no idea this quiet stranger was a Navy SEAL who'd spent 8 years hunting men far more dangerous than him. And he had no idea that his reign of corruption was about to end in handcuffs. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story of justice and loyalty touches your heart, please subscribe for more true stories of courage. The Montana morning arrived cold and crystalline, the kind of spring day where winter hadn't fully released its grip on the mountains. Pine Hollow sat in a valley surrounded by towering peaks still capped with snow, their faces catching the early light and turning it golden rose. The town was small, population barely cresting 2,000, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were currency, and where power once seized was rarely challenged. Jake Morrison's truck rumbled down Main Street, his eyes taking in the familiar storefronts he'd known as a child. 20 years had passed since he'd lived here, but the bones of the town remained the same. The hardware store where his father had bought him his first fishing rod, the library where he'd studied for his high school exams, the cemetery on the hill where that same father now rested beneath a simple granite stone. Jake was 36 years old, but he carried himself with the quiet economy of movement that marked certain kinds of warriors. He wasn't tall, just under 6 feet, but his frame was lean and powerful, built from a decade of brutal physical training and operational deployments. His face was weathered, lined around the eyes from years of squinting into desert suns and scanning hostile horizons. His dark hair was cut military short, and his blue eyes held a depth that suggested he'd seen things most people only encountered in nightmares. In the passenger seat beside him sat Ranger. The Belgian Malinois was a magnificent animal despite his injury. 8 years old, 75 pounds of muscle and loyalty, with a coat of rich fawn and black that gleamed even in the dim morning light. His ears were alert, constantly moving, processing every sound. His dark eyes missed nothing. But it was his front right leg that told his story. It bore the scars of an IED blast in Kandahar province 3 years ago. The leg had healed, but it would never be quite right again. Ranger walked with a slight limp now, a permanent reminder of the day he'd saved Jake's entire squad by alerting to a pressure plate buried beneath sand. They'd both been retired from active duty after that day. Jake had been offered a medical discharge, severe concussion, hearing damage, psychological trauma. He'd taken it. Ranger had been retired too, deemed unfit for further deployment. The military had offered to place Ranger in a civilian home, but Jake had refused. They were a team. They'd bled together. They'd come home together. Now they were here in Pine Hollow on Memorial Day weekend. Jake had made this pilgrimage every year since his father's death 5 years ago. Colonel David Morrison, U.S. Army, retired. A man who'd served his country with honor, then served his hometown as police chief with the same integrity. A man who'd been forced into early retirement by men who found his honesty inconvenient. Jake pulled into the small gravel lot beside Millie's Diner, the only breakfast place in town. The building was a relic from the 1950s, all chrome and red vinyl, with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered. Through the large front windows, Jake could see the morning crowd, ranchers in work boots, a few tourists in hiking gear, local folks reading newspapers over coffee. "Come on, buddy," Jake said quietly, opening the passenger door. Ranger hopped down carefully, favoring his injured leg. Jake grabbed a collapsible water bowl from behind the seat and filled it from a bottle. He set it down, and Ranger drank deeply, his tail wagging slowly in contentment. They walked toward the diner entrance together, Ranger's nails clicking on the pavement. Jake noticed the looks, they always came. Some people saw a beautiful dog, others saw the limp and looked away quickly, uncomfortable with visible damage, with the evidence of sacrifice. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The morning sounds of the diner washed over them, the sizzle of bacon on the griddle, the gurgle of the industrial coffee maker, the low hum of conversation. The air smelled of maple syrup, strong coffee, and frying butter. "Sit anywhere, hun," called a voice from behind the counter. Jake chose a booth near the window, a position that gave him a clear view of the entrance and the street outside. Old habits. Ranger settled on the floor beside him, his head resting on Jake's boot, eyes half closed but still alert. The waitress who approached their table was young, late 20s, Jake guessed, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and tired green eyes that suggested she'd been on her feet for hours already. Her name tag read Casey. She wore the diner's standard uniform, a pale blue dress with a white apron, both spotlessly clean despite the morning rush. "Morning," she said, offering a genuine smile as she set down a menu and a glass of water. Then she noticed Ranger, and her expression softened immediately. "Oh, what a beautiful dog. Is he a service animal?" "Retired military working dog," Jake replied quietly. "He's okay to be here if that's." "Absolutely," Casey interrupted warmly. "We're veteran-friendly. Can I get him some water?" "Already gave him some outside, but thank you." Casey's smile reached her eyes this time. "What can I get you to eat?" "Coffee black and the number 3, eggs over easy." "Coming right up." As Casey walked away, Jake found his gaze drifting around the diner. He recognized a few faces from his childhood, aged now, weathered by 20 years of Montana winters. Some glanced his way with vague recognition but didn't approach. Small-town courtesy, don't intrude on a stranger's privacy, even if that stranger used to be a local kid. The bell above the door chimed again. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they became quieter, more careful. Forks moved more slowly. People glanced up, then quickly back down at their plates. The man who entered filled the doorway. Sheriff Boyd Hackett was a big man, well over 6 feet and pushing 250 pounds. Some of that weight was muscle from his younger days as a high school linebacker, but most of it now was the soft bulk of middle age and self-indulgence. His face was florid and jowly, with small calculating eyes that swept the room like a predator surveying territory. He wore his uniform with casual arrogance, shirt stretched tight across his gut, gun belt sitting low on his hips, badge polished to a mirror shine. His Stetson hat sat at a cocky angle on his head. Behind him came 2 deputies, younger men who moved with the nervous energy of poorly trained attack dogs. They wore sunglasses despite being indoors, an affectation that might have been laughable if the aura of threat surrounding them hadn't been so palpable. Hackett's eyes swept the diner and landed on Jake's booth. More specifically, they landed on Ranger. Jake felt the attention like a physical thing. He didn't tense, didn't react. He simply noted it, the way he'd note the position of a potential threat on patrol. His hand moved casually to rest on Ranger's head, a gentle pressure that communicated calm. Hackett's boots thudded on the linoleum as he walked directly toward Jake's booth. He didn't veer toward the counter, didn't stop to greet the locals who tried to catch his eye with nervous smiles. He walked with purpose, his deputies flanking him like an honor guard. He stopped beside Jake's table, casting a large shadow. "Well now," Hackett said, his voice loud enough to carry through the now silent diner. "Don't see many mutts in here. This your animal friend." Jake looked up slowly, his expression neutral. He took in the badge, the gun, the deliberately intimidating posture. He'd met men like Hackett in every country he deployed to, men who confused power with strength, fear with respect. "He's with me," Jake said quietly. "See, we got health codes in this town," Hackett continued, hooking his thumbs in his belt. "No animals in restaurants except official service dogs. This mutt got paperwork." "He's a retired military working dog," Jake replied, his voice still calm. "Served 8 years, saved lives." Hackett leaned down, his face closer now. Jake could smell old coffee and cigarettes on his breath. The sheriff's eyes flicked to Ranger, taking in the scarred leg, the slight tremble in the injured limb. Then Hackett laughed. It was a cruel sound, deliberately loud. "That right looks more like damaged goods to me. What's wrong with him anyway? Got 3 working legs and 1 useless one." He prodded Ranger's injured leg with the toe of his boot, not hard, but with deliberate disrespect. Ranger's head came up, ears flattening slightly. A low rumble started in his chest. Jake's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Ranger's collar. "Easy," he murmured. "Things aggressive," Hackett announced to the room, straightening up. "Deputy Barnes, make a note. Aggressive animal at Millie's diner, may need to be impounded for public safety." One of the deputies pulled out a small notebook. making a show of writing something down. Jake's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. My dog isn't aggressive. He's responding to a threat. A threat? Hackett's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. You calling me a threat, boy? I'm the law in this town. Been the law for 15 years. You're just some drifter passing through with a crippled mutt. The word crippled hung in the air like poison. He's a war hero, Jake said quietly, each word precise. He saved 12 men, lost the full use of that leg doing it. He's earned more respect than you're showing him. Hackett's face darkened. You got a mouth on you, friend. Let me give you some advice. Pine Hollow's a small town. We don't appreciate outsiders coming in telling us how to act, especially not military types who think putting on a uniform makes them special. He kicked the water bowl Jake had placed beside the booth. It skittered across the floor, water splashing across the linoleum. Ranger's head tracked it, his body tensing. Oops, Hackett said with a nasty grin. Clumsy me. The diner was completely silent now. Every eye was on the confrontation, but no one moved. No one spoke. Jake saw it in their faces, not apathy, but fear. They'd seen this show before. They knew how it ended. Jake took a slow breath, forcing down the rage that threatened to surface. He'd been trained for this, not just in combat, but in restraint. Hackett wanted a reaction, wanted an excuse to escalate. Jake wouldn't give it to him. We'll be leaving, Jake said quietly, reaching for his wallet. Damn right you will, Hackett said. And that mutt, he sets one paw in my town again. I'll cite you for every ordinance I can think of. Might even have to call animal control, have him evaluated. Aggressive dogs sometimes get put down for public safety. It was a naked threat, delivered with a smile. Jake stood slowly. He was several inches shorter than Hackett, lighter by 50 pounds, but something in the way he moved made the sheriff take an involuntary half-step back. It was the movement of a man who understood violence at a fundamental level, who delivered it and survived it, who wore it like a second skin. Have a good day, Sheriff, Jake said, his voice arctic. He dropped a 20 on the table, far more than the meal would have cost. Then he and Ranger walked toward the door, Jake's hand resting gently on the dog's head. As they passed the counter, Casey caught his eye. She looked furious, helpless, and deeply apologetic all at once. I'm sorry, she mouthed silently. Outside in the cold morning air, Jake knelt beside Ranger. He checked the dog over carefully, running his hands along the injured leg, checking for any damage from Hackett's kick. Ranger licked his face, tail wagging, unbothered by the confrontation in the way only a dog who'd survived war could be. Good boy, Jake murmured. You're a good boy. He stood, pulling out his phone to check the time. He'd planned to visit the cemetery after breakfast, then head out of town. Pine Hollow held too many ghosts, too many memories of a father he'd disappointed by not following in his footsteps, by choosing the Navy over the Army, by leaving instead of staying to fight the corruption that had forced his father out. But as he looked back at the diner, through the window where he could see Hackett holding court, laughing with his deputies, something cold and hard settled in Jake's chest. His father had fought this man and lost, had been forced into retirement, his reputation smeared, his life's work dismissed. He died 5 years later, bitter and broken, in a town he'd given everything to protect. Jake had been deployed when it happened, hadn't been there, hadn't fought for his father the way his father had always fought for him. Maybe it was time to stop running from ghosts. He opened his truck, let Ranger hop in, but didn't start the engine. Instead, he sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The passenger door opened unexpectedly. Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his hip, empty, no weapon, civilian life, before he recognized Casey sliding into the passenger seat. She was still wearing her apron, and her hands were shaking. I'm sorry, she said again, this time out loud. God, I'm so sorry. Hackett's a bastard, but what he did to your dog, that was cruel even for him. It's fine, Jake said automatically. It's not fine, Casey's voice was fierce. Nothing about this town is fine, and I'm guessing you're not just passing through, are you? Morrison, your last name's Morrison. Jake looked at her sharply. I recognized you, she explained. You're Chief Morrison's son. I was just a kid when your dad was still chief, but I remember him. He was a good man, one of the only good ones. Yeah, Jake said quietly, he was. Hackett destroyed him, Casey continued, her voice dropping. Made up corruption charges, got the town council to force him out. Your dad tried to expose Hackett's operation, and Hackett crushed him for it. Operation. Casey glanced back at the diner, then at Jake. How long are you staying in town? I was leaving today. Don't, she said it urgently, intensely. Please, I know you don't owe this town anything. I know your dad got a raw deal, but if there's any chance you could help, any chance at all. She trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. My brother's in jail, Danny Brennan. Hackett framed him on drug charges 6 months ago. Planted evidence, falsified reports, the whole thing. Danny's a veteran, 2 Army, 2 tour in Iraq. He came home, tried to make a life here. But he saw something he wasn't supposed to see, and Hackett put him away. Jake studied her face. He'd been trained to read people, to detect lies and manipulation. He saw none of that in Casey Brennan. He saw desperation, yes, but also honesty and courage. What did your brother see? Casey leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. The gambling operation. Hackett's running an illegal gambling ring out of the evidence locker at the sheriff's station. Has been for years, takes in thousands every week. Danny stumbled onto it by accident. He was doing electrical work at the station, saw something he shouldn't have. 2 days later, Hackett's deputies found heroin in Danny's truck during a traffic stop. Danny's never touched drugs in his life. But Hackett had a judge in his pocket, and now my brother's doing 5 years in state prison. Jake's mind was working, processing. It made sense, explained the fear in the diner, explained his father's forced retirement, explained why a town of 2,000 people would tolerate a sheriff like Boyd Hackett. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been trying to fight him for 6 months, Casey said, and now there were tears in her eyes. I've written to the state attorney general. I've contacted the FBI field office in Billings. Nothing happens. Hackett's got connections, got people paid off. The few folks who tried to stand up to him have been driven out of town or worse. I'm a waitress with a high school education and a kid to feed. I can't fight him alone. But you, she looked at him with something like hope. You're not afraid of him. I saw that in there, and you've got skills, training. If anyone could help Danny, could help this town. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Ranger, sensing his tension, whined softly and nuzzled his shoulder. He thought about his father, about the bitter old man dying alone, reputation destroyed, life's work dismissed as corruption when he'd been the only honest cop in Pine Hollow, about the memorial service Jake would attend tomorrow, standing by a grave and feeling like a coward for having left. I can't promise anything, Jake said finally, but I'm not leaving today. The relief on Casey's face was profound. Thank you, God, thank you. I'll need information, everything you know about Hackett's operation, everything your brother told you, and I'll need to know who might be on our side. There's one, Casey said immediately, Deputy Maria Santos. She's been collecting evidence too, waiting for the right moment. She's the only honest cop left on Hackett's force. I think she'd help if she knew someone was actually going to do something. Jake nodded slowly. Okay, tell Deputy Santos I'll be at the cemetery this afternoon around 3. If she wants to talk, she can find me there. Make it look casual, like she's paying respects. Casey nodded, then hesitated. Your truck, you should move it before Hackett sees it again. He'll impound it on some fake violation, trap you here without a way out. But even as she said it, Jake saw the sheriff's cruiser rolling down Main Street, slowing as it passed his Ford F-150. Too late, Jake muttered. Hackett pulled up alongside, his window rolling down. His face was split in a wide, predatory grin. That your truck, Morrison? So he knew the name now, had probably radioed in to check the license plate. It is. Funny thing, you're parked in a loading zone. That's a violation. Plus I see your registration tabs are expired. That's another violation. And is that window tint legal? Might have to impound the vehicle, run a full inspection. Safety first. Every word was a lie. Jake's registration was current. He wasn't in a loading zone. The tint was factory standard, but truth didn't matter when the law was corrupt. How long? Jake asked flatly. Oh, could take a week, maybe 2. We're real thorough. Hackett's grin widened. But hey, there's a motel on the edge of town. Pine View. Not too expensive. You can wait there while we process everything. Course, they don't allow pets. Guess you'll have to find somewhere to board your crippled mutt. The trap was perfect. Separate Jake from his truck and from Ranger. leave him vulnerable, isolated, easy to run off or worse. Jake met Hackett's eyes and saw the challenge there. The sheriff expected him to back down, to get angry, to make a mistake. Instead, Jake smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. "Take the truck, Sheriff. I'll be at the Pine View, and Ranger stays with me. Federal law protects service animals in hotels. But you knew that, didn't you?" Hackett's grin faltered slightly. He'd expected resistance, not compliance. Compliance was harder to escalate. "Better not cause any trouble, Morrison." "Wouldn't dream of it." The cruiser pulled away, and a tow truck appeared almost immediately. They'd had it standing by, planned this. Jake watched dispassionately as his truck was hooked up and towed away. Casey was still in the passenger seat, looking horrified. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault." "No," Jake said quietly, watching his truck disappear around a corner. "This is Hackett's fault, and he just made his first mistake." "What mistake?" Jake looked at her, and for just a moment, Casey saw behind the calm exterior to the cold, calculating warrior beneath. "He let me stay." The Pine View Motel sat on the eastern edge of Pine Hollow, a relic from the 1960s with a flickering neon sign and a row of numbered doors that had been painted more times than anyone could count. Jake rented room 7, paying cash for a week. The clerk, an elderly man with rheumy eyes, took the money without comment but gave Ranger a kind smile. "Military dog. Retired. Thank you for your service, both of you." He didn't ask questions about Hackett's harassment, didn't offer sympathy, but as Jake turned to leave, the old man said quietly, "Room 7's got a back window that opens onto the woods, just in case you need to know." Jake nodded his understanding. Not everyone in Pine Hollow was under Hackett's thumb. Some were just scared. Others were quietly preparing for the day when someone would finally stand up. The room was basic but clean, a queen bed, a small TV, a bathroom with a shower that had seen better days. Jake unpacked his duffel bag efficiently. Clothes, toiletries, and hidden in a false bottom, items that were decidedly not civilian. A tactical radio, a set of lock picks, night vision monocular, and his phone, not a civilian smartphone, but a ruggedized encrypted device issued to special operations personnel. He set up a small water bowl for Ranger, filled it from the tap, then sat on the bed and pulled out his phone. He had 3 contacts in his favorites list. The first was his team leader in Virginia. The second was an NCIS liaison he'd worked with on 2 joint operations. The third was a number he'd hoped never to call, a back-channel connection to a federal prosecutor in Denver who specialized in public corruption. He called the second number. It rang 3 times. Winchester. "Jeff, it's Jake Morrison, Team 7. "Jake, been a while, man. What's up? You stateside?" "Montana, Pine Hollow, small town near Glacier. I need a favor, and it's not official business yet, but it might be." The tone on the other end shifted immediately, becoming professional. "I'm listening." Jake spent the next 15 minutes laying out everything Casey had told him, everything he'd observed, everything his father had tried to expose before being forced out. Jeff Winchester listened without interrupting, and when Jake finished, there was a long silence. "That's a serious allegation," Jeff said finally. "Local corruption, racketeering, false imprisonment. But Jake, NCIS jurisdiction is military personnel and federal property, unless this Hackett guy is running his operation on a base. Casey's brother Danny is a veteran, Army, 2 tour. Hackett falsely imprisoned him." "That gives us an angle," Jeff admitted. "Military veteran targeted for retaliation. We could claim jurisdiction if we can prove the charges were fabricated specifically because of his veteran status, or if he was targeted for trying to report corruption that affected military families." He paused. "But I need something solid, Jake. I can't just roll into Montana on your say-so. I need evidence. Photos, documents, recordings. Something that proves this isn't just a local dispute." "I'll get it." "Jake," Jeff's voice carried a warning. "You're retired. You're a civilian. If you're thinking about conducting some kind of solo operation." "I'm thinking about visiting my dad's grave and maybe taking some photos of the local scenery," Jake said mildly. Jeff snorted. "Right, listen, be careful. Corrupt cops are dangerous, and if this guy has been running things for 15 years, he's smart. Don't give him a reason to escalate to violence." "I won't, but Jeff, one more thing. can you run a background check on Boyd Hackett? I want to know where his money comes from, what assets he owns, if he's got any federal red flags." "I can do that. Give me 24 hours. They ended the call. Jake sat there for a moment, feeling the familiar pre-mission focus settling over him. This wasn't war. This was darker in some ways, fighting corruption in his own country, in his father's town. But the fundamentals were the same. Gather intelligence, identify the enemy's weaknesses, build a coalition, execute with precision. Ranger, sensing Jake's shift in mood, patted over and rested his heavy head on Jake's knee. Jake scratched behind the dog's ears absently. "We're going to war, buddy," he murmured, "just not the kind we're used to." At 3 o'clock that afternoon, Jake walked through the gates of Pine Hollow Cemetery. It was a small plot of land on a hillside, shaded by ancient pines, with modest headstones marking generations of local families. He found his father's grave easily. He'd been here enough times. David Morrison, Colonel, U.S. Army, 1951-2018. Beloved father and faithful servant. Jake knelt, placing his hand on the cold granite. "Hey, Dad, sorry it took me a year to get back. Deployment ran long." He stayed there, head bowed, for several minutes. Ranger sat beside him, alert and watchful. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path behind them. "Mind if I pay my respects?" Jake turned to see a woman in a sheriff's deputy uniform approaching. She was in her mid-30s, Hispanic, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a carefully neutral expression. Her badge read M. Santos. "Help yourself," Jake said quietly, standing. Maria Santos walked to the grave of a woman 3 rows over. She knelt, touched the headstone, whispered something, but Jake noticed her eyes kept flicking toward him. After a suitable interval, she stood and walked over. "You're Jake Morrison." "I am." "Casey Brennan said you'd be here, said you might be someone who could help." She glanced around the empty cemetery. "I'm taking a huge risk even talking to you, if Hackett finds out." "Then we'd better make it worth the risk." Santos studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. "There's a hiking trail half a mile north of here, Wildflower Loop. Meet me there in 20 minutes. Come alone, leave the dog at your motel. If I see anyone else, I walk away and we never speak again." Jake nodded. Santos left without another word. 20 minutes later, Jake stood on a narrow trail that wound through dense pine forest. Wildflowers, lupin and columbine, dotted the meadow clearings between the trees. It was beautiful country, the kind of place that should have been peaceful. Santos appeared from the trail ahead, moving quickly. "You weren't followed?" "No. You're sure?" "I spent 10 years avoiding people who were trying to kill me," Jake said mildly. "I think I can avoid a small-town deputy." Santos almost smiled. Then she pulled a small notebook from her jacket pocket. "I've been collecting evidence on Hackett for 3 years. Names, dates, amounts. I've documented every dirty deal, every payoff, every time he's abused his authority. I've been waiting for someone from outside to help, someone with federal connections, but everyone I've contacted has either ignored me or been bought off by Hackett's reach." She handed the notebook to Jake. He flipped through it, his expression growing darker with each page. It was meticulous: times, dates, witness names, dollar amounts, a complete record of a criminal enterprise masquerading as law enforcement. "Why haven't you just left?" Jake asked. "Taken this to the state police, the FBI, started over somewhere else?" "Because this is my home," Santos said fiercely. "Because my family's lived here for 4 generations. Because I'm a cop and cops don't abandon their communities when things get hard. And because," she hesitated, "because Hackett has leverage on me. My little brother got arrested for DUI when he was 19. Should have been a misdemeanor, community service. Hackett made it go away completely, no record, no consequences. At the time, I was grateful. Now I realize it was insurance. If I ever go against him, he'll find new evidence, say I falsified the report, destroy my career and probably my brother's life." "Clever," Jake admitted. "Keep people grateful and terrified at the same time." "That's Hackett," Santos took a breath. "Look, I don't know what you're planning. Casey said you're some kind of special forces. Navy SEAL, retired. Okay, but whatever you're thinking, you need to understand. Hackett is smart and he's ruthless. He's got half the town council in his pocket, owns a judge, and has deputies who'd kill for him if he asked. You can't just waltz in and take him down. I'm not planning to waltz, Jake said. I'm planning to build a federal case so airtight that his connections won't matter. But I need more than this notebook. I need physical evidence. Photos, recordings, documents from his office. Can you get me access? Santos shook her head. The station's always staffed. There's no way to get in without being seen. What about his personal vehicle? Casey mentioned he uses his truck to transport cash. He does. Santos's eyes lit up with understanding. He's got a modified compartment under the truck bed. I've seen him access it twice, but I've never been able to get close enough to photograph what's inside. Where does he park at nights? At his house. It's isolated, 5 miles outside town on Patterson Road. But Jake, if you get caught on his property. I won't get caught. That night, under a moonless sky, Jake moved through the Montana forest like a ghost. He'd left Ranger at the motel. The dog would be a liability on this kind of operation, would want to protect Jake if things went wrong. He'd changed into dark clothing, non-reflective, with soft-soled boots that made no sound on the forest floor. He carried a small pack with night vision, a camera, and his lock picks. Hackett's house was a sprawling ranch-style building, lit by harsh floodlights that turned the surrounding yard into a harsh white glare. But Jake wasn't approaching the house. He was approaching the detached garage, and more specifically, the dark blue Dodge Ram 2500 parked in the driveway. He waited in the tree line for 30 minutes, watching. Lights in the house eventually went dark. He saw Hackett's bulk pass in front of a window, then disappear. 11:15 at night, time to move. Jake emerged from the trees, staying low, moving through the shadows between floodlights. He reached the truck and crouched beside it, pulling out his phone and switching it to camera mode with the flash disabled. The compartment Santos had mentioned was clever, a false bottom in the truck bed, accessible via a hydraulic system that required a key to activate. Jake studied the mechanism for a moment, then pulled out a small inspection mirror and angled it to see underneath. What he saw made his jaw tighten. Stacks of cash, dozens of bundles neatly wrapped, thousands of dollars, maybe tens of thousands, more than a small-town sheriff should have in a hidden compartment in his truck. Jake took photos from every angle, careful to document the vehicle's license plate, the hidden mechanism, the cash itself. Then he noticed something else, a leather ledger, similar to the one Santos had shown him, wedged beside the cash. He needed that ledger, but taking it would alert Hackett that someone had breached his truck. Jake made a split-second decision. He pulled out his lock picks, went to work on the compartment lock. It was a good lock, commercial grade, but Jake had practiced this skill in training exercises and real operations for a decade. It took him 4 minutes to pick it. The compartment opened with a quiet, hydraulic hiss. Jake reached in, grabbed the ledger, and used his phone to photograph every page, working as quickly as he could. The ledger was damning: names, dates, amounts paid and received, all in Hackett's handwriting. It matched Santos's information, but provided even more detail. This wasn't just a gambling operation. It was a complete criminal enterprise involving kickbacks from local businesses, payoffs to officials, and regular payments to his deputies for their silence. On one page, Jake found an entry that made his blood run cold. D. Brennan silenced, frame arrest, $5 K to Judge Franklin. Danny Brennan, Casey's brother, the veteran Hackett had framed. It was all here, documented in the sheriff's own hand. Jake finished photographing the last page, then carefully closed the ledger and returned it to exactly where he'd found it. He locked the compartment, checked that everything appeared undisturbed, and melted back into the darkness. He was 50 yards into the forest when the house floodlights suddenly blazed to full brightness. Jake froze, dropping into a crouch behind a fallen log. The house's back door slammed open. Hackett emerged, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, a shotgun in his hands. Behind him came one of his deputies. Jake recognized him from the diner, the one who'd taken notes. I heard something, Hackett growled, racking the shotgun. Check the perimeter. The deputy moved toward the truck, shining a powerful flashlight. Jake remained absolutely still, controlling his breathing, becoming part of the forest. This was what he'd trained for evasion, staying undetected even when the enemy was actively hunting. The deputy checked the truck, tried the doors, locked, then shone his light toward the forest. The beam swept past Jake's position, missing him by inches. "Nothing here, Sheriff." "You sure? I heard something by the garage." "Probably a deer or a raccoon. Everything looks secure." Hackett stood there for a long moment, clearly unsatisfied. Then he spat on the ground and turned back toward the house. "Keep your radio on tonight. I want patrols doubled." They went inside. The floodlights remained on. Jake waited a full 30 minutes motionless before he began his withdrawal. He moved slowly, carefully, taking a circuitous route back to town. It took him 2 hours to cover 3 miles, but when he finally slipped through the back window of his motel room, he was certain he hadn't been followed. Ranger greeted him with enthusiastic tail wags and worried whines. He'd known Jake was gone, hadn't liked it. Jake spent several minutes reassuring the dog, then pulled out his encrypted phone and began uploading the photos to a secure server. He also sent everything to Jeff Winchester at NCIS with a simple message. "Evidence acquired, financial records showing gambling operation, bribery and false imprisonment of veteran Danny Brennan. Need federal warrant and task force. Time sensitive." The response came 20 minutes later. "Holy shit, Jake, this is solid. I'm briefing the director first thing tomorrow morning. Expect a call by 800. Do not attempt any further investigation. Stay safe." Jake smiled grimly. The evidence was secured. The federal government was moving. Now he just had to survive long enough for them to arrive. The next morning brought unexpected company. Jake was giving Ranger his breakfast, a carefully measured portion of kibble mixed with a bit of wet food, when someone knocked on the motel room door. 3 sharp raps, purposeful but not aggressive. Ranger's ears perked up, but he didn't bark. Jake glanced through the peephole. Casey Brennan stood outside, holding a covered dish and looking nervous. Jake opened the door. "Morning." "Morning," Casey replied, offering a tentative smile. "I brought you and Ranger some real food. Figured you're probably living on vending machine snacks." She held up the dish. "Homemade breakfast casserole and scrambled eggs for your dog." Jake stepped aside, letting her in. Casey set the food on the small table, then knelt down to greet Ranger properly. The dog, always a good judge of character, wagged his tail and licked her hand. "He's beautiful," Casey said softly, running her hands over Ranger's scarred leg with gentle respect. "My little girl would love him. She's 7, obsessed with animals." "Bring her by sometime," Jake offered. "Ranger's good with kids." Casey stood, suddenly serious. Were you able to talk to Maria?" "I was, and I did some additional reconnaissance last night." "Reconnaissance," Casey almost smiled. "That's a nice way of putting it. Did you find anything?" "Enough to bring federal charges. I've got contacts in NCIS and the FBI. They're reviewing the evidence now. If it holds up, and it will, they'll be here within 48 hours with warrants." Casey's hand flew to her mouth. "You're serious? You actually found proof?" "I did." Hackett's been documenting his own crimes. Classic arrogance. He never thought anyone would dare look. Tears welled in Casey's eyes. "Danny, does this mean, can they get Danny out?" "If the evidence shows he was falsely imprisoned, yes. It'll take time, legal proceedings, appeals, but he'll come home." Casey sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, overcome. "I can't believe it. After 6 months of feeling helpless, of watching my brother rot in prison for something he didn't do." She looked up at Jake. "Thank you, God, thank you. Thank your brother for being brave enough to stand up to Hackett in the first place," Jake said quietly. "And thank Deputy Santos. She's been collecting evidence for 3 years. This is her win as much as anyone's." A new voice spoke from the doorway. "Touching scene." Jake spun, his body tensing, instinctively placing himself between the door and Casey. Sheriff Boyd Hackett stood in the doorway, one hand resting casually on his gun belt. Behind him stood both of his deputies, their faces expressionless behind mirrored sunglasses. "Door was unlocked," Hackett said with a nasty smile. "Thought I'd check in on our visitor, make sure he's settling in okay." Ranger growled, a deep rumbling sound. Jake's hand moved to the dog's collar, holding him steady. "We're fine, Sheriff. You can go." "Can I?" Hackett took a step inside, his bulk filling the small room. See, funny thing happened last night. I had a feeling someone was poking around my property. Call it cop instinct. So I set up a little trail camera this morning, checked the footage. And you know what? There was a raccoon. Big one, real clever, smart enough to pick a lock. He knows, Jake realized, or he suspects. Either way, this was about to get dangerous. Raccoons are common around here, Jake said evenly. Yeah, they are. Hackett's eyes were hard. But this particular raccoon looked a lot like a two-legged varmint, the kind that might think he's clever, might think he can come into my town and cause trouble. Casey stood, her voice shaking but defiant. We haven't done anything wrong. Haven't you? Hackett turned his attention to her. Casey Brennan, isn't it? Sister of Danny Brennan, convicted drug dealer currently doing time in state prison. You know, conspiracy's a serious charge. Helping someone interfere with a law enforcement investigation could get you arrested too. Then who'd take care of that little girl of yours? What's her name? Emma. The threat was explicit. Jake felt rage ignite in his chest. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, calculating fury of a warrior who'd just been given a target. You need to leave, Jake said quietly. Now. Or what? Hackett took another step forward. You'll set your crippled mud on me. I'd shoot it before it took 2 steps. Self-defense. Everyone would understand. Ranger's growl intensified. The dog's muscles were coiled, ready to attack if Jake gave the command. But Jake knew what would happen. Hackett wanted an excuse to kill Ranger, maybe kill Jake too. A tragic accident. A dangerous dog, an aggressive outsider, a sheriff defending himself. Jake's mind raced through options. He could take Hackett, had the training, had the skills, but not without casualties, not without escalating this to violence that would ruin any chance of a clean legal takedown. Sheriff Hackett. Everyone turned. Deputy Maria Santos stood in the doorway behind Hackett's men, her hand resting on her own sidearm. Her face was pale but determined. We got a call, domestic disturbance on Maple Street. We need to respond. Hackett's jaw tightened. Handle it yourself, Santos. Protocol requires 2 units for domestics. You know that, sir. It was a lifeline and Hackett knew it. Refusing would be suspicious. He stared at Santos for a long moment, searching for betrayal, but her face remained professionally neutral. Finally, he turned back to Jake. We'll continue this conversation later, Morrison, real soon. He looked at Casey. And you girl, watch yourself, watch your daughter. Then he was gone, his deputies following like trained dogs. Santos lingered for just a moment, meeting Jake's eyes. She gave the tiniest nod, I've got your back, then followed her boss. When they were alone, Casey started shaking. He threatened Emma. He threatened my little girl. He's scared, Jake said, helping her sit back down. That threat means he knows something's wrong, knows his operation is in danger. Scared animals are dangerous, but they also make mistakes. What do we do? You and Emma need to leave town. Today, do you have family somewhere else? My sister in Bozeman, but I can't just leave. I have work, I have. Casey, Jake crouched in front of her, his voice gentle but firm. Hackett just threatened your daughter. That means he's willing to escalate. In 48 hours, this will be over. Federal agents will be here. Hackett will be arrested. But until then, you and Emma are targets. Please, get out of town. Casey nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. Okay, you're right. I'll pack. We'll leave this afternoon. Good. And Casey, when Danny gets out, when this is all over, come back. This is your home. Don't let Hackett take that from you. She squeezed his hand, then left quickly. Jake locked the door behind her and sat down on the bed, suddenly exhausted. Ranger climbed up beside him, technically not allowed, but Jake had long ago stopped enforcing that rule and rested his head on Jake's lap. 48 hours, Jake said to the dog. We just have to survive 48 hours. Ranger's tail thumped against the mattress. In the dog's world, as long as they were together, everything would be okay. Jake wished he had the same certainty. Memorial Day dawned clear and cold, the kind of morning where frost still clung to the grass even as the sun climbed over the eastern peaks. Pine Hollow's annual memorial service was held at the cemetery, a tradition going back decades. The entire town gathered to honor their veterans, to lay wreaths and offer prayers. Jake hadn't planned to attend. His presence would be provocative, would give Hackett another opportunity for confrontation. But as he sat in his motel room, drinking instant coffee and watching the sunrise, he thought about his father, about the colonel who'd served his country honorably, then tried to serve his community the same way, about the man who'd been destroyed by corruption and died alone. "We're going, buddy," Jake said to Ranger. "Dad deserves to have us there." The cemetery was crowded when they arrived. Easily 200 people, maybe more, all gathered around a makeshift stage where the mayor was preparing to speak. American flags fluttered in the morning breeze. Veterans wore their uniforms, some ancient and threadbare, others crisp and new. Children waved small flags. Jake stayed at the back, Ranger at his side. He saw Casey near the front. Good, she hadn't left yet. He saw Deputy Santos in uniform, standing at attention. And he saw Sheriff Hackett on the stage, wearing his dress uniform, looking every inch the respected lawman. The hypocrisy made Jake's stomach turn. The mayor's speech was generic, full of platitudes about sacrifice and service. Then Hackett took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the sheriff began, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd, "Memorial Day is about remembering our fallen heroes. But it's also about protecting what they died for, our communities, our way of life. Today, I want to talk about a different kind of threat, not from foreign enemies, but from people who come into our towns pretending to be something they're not." Jake tensed. This was a direct attack. "We've got a stranger in Pine Hollow," Hackett continued. "Calls himself a veteran, says his dog is a hero, but I've looked into his background and I've got questions. Questions about his discharge. Questions about what he's really doing here. And I'm here to tell you all, be careful who you trust. Not everyone who wears a uniform deserves your respect." The crowd was murmuring now, confused and uncomfortable. Jake saw people glancing back at him, recognition dawning. Hackett pointed directly at Jake. "That man there, Jake Morrison, son of our former police chief. He's been sneaking around town, asking questions, making accusations about law enforcement. And last night, someone broke into my personal vehicle. Coincidence? I don't think so." The crowd turned fully now, staring at Jake. He saw suspicion in some faces, fear in others. Hackett was doing exactly what Jake had feared, turning the town against him, painting him as the threat. "So here's what's going to happen," Hackett announced. "Jake Morrison, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, attempted burglary, and interfering with a law enforcement investigation. Deputies, take him into custody." The two deputies started moving through the crowd toward Jake. Ranger sensed the threat, his hackles rising, a low growl building in his throat. Jake had a split second to decide. He could run, lead the deputies away from the crowd, from the innocents who could get caught in the crossfire. He could fight, disable both deputies, but that would make him look like exactly what Hackett was claiming he was. Or he could comply, trust that the federal case would arrive in time, trust the system he'd spent his life defending. But before he could decide, another voice cut through the tension. "Sheriff Hackett." Deputy Maria Santos stepped forward from her position near the stage. She was holding her phone, holding it up so everyone could see. Her hand was shaking, but her voice was strong. "I've been recording this entire conversation," she announced, "and I'm live streaming it to the State Attorney General's office, the FBI, and 6 different news agencies. Everything you just said, falsely accusing a veteran, ordering an unlawful arrest, it's all documented." The crowd gasped. Hackett's face went from flushed to pale to purple in the space of a heartbeat. "Santos, what the hell do you think you're?" "I think I'm done being silent," Santos said, and now her voice was ringing with conviction. "For 3 years, I've watched you destroy this town. I've watched you frame innocent people, run illegal operations, and abuse your power. I've collected evidence. Names, dates, amounts. And last night, Jake Morrison risked his life to get photographic evidence of your crimes. It's all been sent to federal authorities. They're probably already on their way." Hackett's hand moved toward his gun. "Don't," Jake's voice cut through the chaos, calm and utterly cold. He hadn't moved, but something in his posture had changed. He was no longer a visitor to a memorial service. He was a SEAL operator assessing a threat. "You pull that weapon, Sheriff, and this ends very badly for you." "You threatening me, boy?" Hackett's hand stayed on his holster. "No, I'm giving you the only advice that might keep you out of a federal prison for the rest of your life. Stand down, wait for the investigators, cooperate. It's your only play." For a moment, the entire cemetery held its breath. Then the sound of helicopter rotors echoed off the mountains. Everyone looked up, Two black helicopters were approaching from the south, flying low and fast. Behind them, Jake could see a convoy of vehicles racing up the main road into town, Suburbans and sedans, unmarked but unmistakable. The federal government had arrived. The helicopters landed in the field adjacent to the cemetery, their rotors kicking up dust and grass. Doors opened, and men and women in tactical gear emerged, FBI and NCIS agents, wearing raid jackets carrying weapons. Leading them was Jeff Winchester, Jake's contact at NCIS. He strode across the cemetery, flanked by two FBI agents, and walked straight up to Sheriff Hackett. "Boyd Hackett, you're under arrest for racketeering, bribery, corruption of public officials, and falsification of evidence." Jeff pulled out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Hackett stood there, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage, as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. His two deputies were being similarly detained, agents reading them their rights. The crowd was completely silent, stunned. They'd lived under Hackett's reign for 15 years. Many had believed he was untouchable, and now he was being led away in handcuffs in front of the entire town on Memorial Day. Jake felt a presence beside him. Deputy Santos stood there, tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered. "Oh my God, we actually did it." "You did it," Jake corrected. "You collected the evidence. You had the courage to stand up." Jeff Winchester walked over, grinning. "Hell of a way to spend Memorial Day, Morrison. Nice work on those photos, by the way. Clean, professional, completely admissible. Your file said you were good at recon." "Thanks for moving fast." When an active SEAL sends evidence of a federal crime involving a veteran being falsely imprisoned, we don't screw around. Jeff glanced at Ranger, who was calmly sitting at Jake's side despite the chaos. "That the famous war dog?" "This is Ranger." Jeff knelt down, offering his hand for Ranger to sniff. "Heard about Kandahar. Heard you saved a lot of lives, buddy. Thank you for your service." He looked up at Jake. "We're going to need statements from you, from Deputy Santos, from Casey Brennan. Probably take most of the day. Then there'll be a federal investigation, trials, the whole process. You planning to stick around?" Jake looked out at the cemetery, at his father's grave visible on the hillside, at the town his father had tried so hard to protect. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I think I'll stick around." 6 months later. Winter had come again to Pine Hollow, the mountains draped in snow, the town transformed into the kind of Christmas card scene that tourists paid good money to see. But the changes in Pine Hollow went deeper than the season. The sheriff's station had new leadership. Deputy Maria Santos had been appointed interim sheriff by the state, pending a special election in the spring. She'd cleaned house, hired 2 new deputies with actual law enforcement experience, and instituted transparency measures that would have been unthinkable under Hackett's regime. Boyd Hackett himself was in federal prison awaiting trial, his assets seized, his empire dismantled. His 2 deputies had taken plea deals, trading testimony for reduced sentences. The judge on Hackett's payroll had resigned, and a special prosecutor was reviewing every case he'd presided over. And Danny Brennan had come home. Jake stood outside Millie's diner on a cold December afternoon, watching through the window as Danny hugged his sister Casey and lifted her daughter Emma high in the air, the little girl squealing with laughter. Danny looked thinner than in his photos, older, but the light was back in his eyes. He was free. "Beautiful sight, isn't it?" Jake turned to see Maria Santos walking up, bundled in a heavy sheriff's jacket, a coffee cup in each hand. She offered one to Jake. "Well, thanks." "Danny looks good," Santos said, watching the reunion through the window. "Strong. Casey says he's already talking about going back to school, maybe becoming an electrician. Says he wants to help rebuild the town properly." "That's good. Town needs good people." Santos smiled. "Town needs you too, Morrison. You know, the city council asked me to officially offer you a job, deputy position. Hell, they'd probably make you sheriff if you wanted it." Jake shook his head. "I'm not a cop, never wanted to be." "Then what do you want?" Jake thought about it. He'd been asking himself the same question for 6 months. He'd planned to leave Pine Hollow as soon as the federal case was solid to go back to what? He had no family except Ranger, no home except the duffel bag in his truck, no purpose except the one he'd just fulfilled. But something had changed. He'd rented a small cabin on the edge of town, a place with a big yard where Ranger could run. He'd started hiking the mountain trails, relearning the landscape of his childhood. He'd gone to his father's grave every week and told him stories about how the town was healing. And he'd realized something. His father's fight hadn't ended with his forced retirement. It had just been waiting for someone to pick it up again. "I want to stay," Jake said finally. "Not as a cop, but as, I don't know, a citizen, someone who gives a damn." Santos grinned. "Works for me. Hey, speaking of giving a damn, the Veterans Support Center Casey's opening. She asked if you'd be willing to teach a self-defense class. Basic stuff, helping people feel safer, more confident, especially women and kids who have been through trauma." Jake considered it. He'd spent his career learning how to hurt people efficiently. Maybe it was time to teach people how to protect themselves, to stand up to bullies like Hackett. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." The diner door opened, and Casey emerged with Danny and Emma. The little girl saw Ranger and immediately ran over, her parents following. "Mr. Jake, can I pet Ranger?" "Always," Jake said, smiling, "but you know the rule." "Ask him first," Emma said dutifully. She held out her small hand to Ranger. "Ranger, may I please pet you?" Ranger's tail wagged, and he gently nuzzled Emma's hand, his signal that petting was acceptable. Emma squealed with delight and began running her fingers through his fur, completely unafraid of the scars on his leg. Danny Brennan extended his hand to Jake. "I never got to properly thank you for what you did, for believing Casey, for getting me out." Jake shook his hand. "You stood up to Hackett when no one else would. That took courage. I just helped finish what you started." "Still, my family owes you everything." "Your family doesn't owe me anything," Jake said, "but Pine Hollow does, and I plan to collect by sticking around and making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Danny smiled. "Good, we need more people like you." As the family headed off, Emma skipping ahead, Casey called back. "Grand opening of the center is next week. You and Ranger better be there." Jake waved, then looked down at Ranger, who was watching Emma's retreating form with what Jake could swear was a dog's version of a smile. "What do you think, buddy? Ready to become a permanent fixture in Pine Hollow?" Ranger looked up at him, tail wagging, eyes bright. He didn't care about towns or justice or revenge. He cared about Jake, and wherever Jake was, Ranger was home. Jake scratched behind the dog's ears. "Yeah, me too." They started walking back toward the truck, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the snow. As they passed the sheriff's station, Jake saw Santos through the window, working at her desk, finally able to do the job she'd always wanted to do properly. He thought about his father, about the man who'd tried so hard to protect this town and been destroyed for it, about the legacy of service and sacrifice, about how sometimes justice took 20 years and a son's return to finally be served. "Hey, Dad," Jake murmured, too quiet for anyone but Ranger to hear. "We got him. We got them all. The town's safe now, I hope. I hope that's enough. I hope you're proud." In his pocket, his phone buzzed. A text from Jeff Winchester at NCIS. "Hackett's trial starts in March. Prosecution wants you to testify. Also, completely unrelated, we've got a corruption case in Wyoming, small town, dirty mayor. Interested in consulting." Jake stared at the message for a long moment. Then he smiled. He'd spent 10 years fighting enemies overseas. Maybe it was time to fight a different kind of enemy, right here at home. Small towns with big corruption. Veterans being failed by the systems meant to protect them. Dogs like Ranger being mocked for their scars instead of honored for their sacrifice. He typed back, interested, send details. Ranger looked up at him, sensing the shift in mood. "Looks like we've got a new mission, buddy," Jake said. "Think you're up for it?" Ranger barked once, sharp, certain, ready. They climbed into the truck. Jake started the engine, but before pulling out, he took one last look at the town, at the mountains standing guard, at the smoke rising from chimneys, at the Christmas lights beginning to twinkle as dusk approached. Pine Hollow was healing. It would take time. Corruption had deep roots and trust needed to be rebuilt. But for the first time in 15 years, the town had a chance to be what it was always meant to be, a good place, a safe place, a home. And Jake Morrison, Navy SEAL, retired, was going to make damn sure it stayed that way. If this story of courage, loyalty, and justice touched your heart, please subscribe for more true stories of veterans and heroes standing up for what's right. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that good people can win against corruption. And comment below which moment inspired you most. We pray that God blesses every person watching this. We pray for strength for those fighting their own battles against injustice. We pray for courage for those who see wrong and want to stand up. And we pray that the spirit of warriors like Jake and Ranger lives in all of us. If you believe that one person with courage can change everything, if you believe that loyalty and honor still matter in this world, if you believe that God watches over those who fight for the helpless, write Amen in the comments below. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for believing in justice. Stay strong, stay faithful, and God bless you all.